Thank you so much, Gabby, and good evening, everyone. I'm really, again, appreciative, as Gabby mentioned, of you taking the time this evening to meet with us at this workshop. And I just want to express again my appreciation to all of the input that we've received to date on this project to lead to where we are today, which we're going to go over that. I'm going to introduce our team real quickly. Again, my name is Mike Costa. I'm a principal transportation planner here at PCTPA, or Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. And we are a small staff, but a lean and mean staff that we also partner with, of course, many consultants to help us with our efforts. In this case, I'll introduce my other colleague, Corey Peterson, who's a senior transportation planner that's working with me on this project. But then our consultant team that's working on this project, which is WSP, Gabby, you've met already as she introduced us, but then Eric Bird also is part of the WSP team, and he'll be presenting later on in this workshop. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what we're going to do at this workshop is we're going to explain to you, again, what led us to where we are today, what essential work was done to lead up to the draft recommended service proposal that we are going to go over today. And what we really want you to think about as we talk about what we've done and how we've got there is when we're going over the service plan changes and recommendations, do these make sense to you? You know, from your perspective, you bring a stakeholder perspective that maybe you're a transit rider, maybe you work with people that ride transit, maybe you work for an entity that provides public transit services or helps people that need public transit services. So we want to definitely hear your perspective in this discussion and in this workshop. And we want to understand when we present some of our draft service proposal ideas, we want to understand if there's things that you think we did right, and if there's things that you think maybe we need to look at differently, or maybe we are way off base in terms of our proposal. So feel free to ask questions to be able for you to answer some of those questions about, is this right, is this wrong, if there's something we need clarification on. And then lastly, you know, are there improvements that we can make to some of our recommended services that we can then carry forward for consideration after this public comment period is over. Next slide, please. I already introduced our staff, so if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm now going to talk a little bit about, again, how did we get to where we are tonight, and how did we propose what we are proposing? Well, back in July of 2023 is when we really began these planning efforts and brought, again, WSP on board to assist us with this effort. And one of these things I'd like to make very clear is that our service recommendations are only pertinent to two operators, which is Placer County Transit and Auburn Transit, so the services that they provide. However, we are coordinating very closely with our other partnering agency here in the South Placer region, which is Roseville Transit, that is working on their own comprehensive operational analysis, or COA, service planning effort, that we are integrating our two service planning efforts together. So we're going to focus our service recommendations tonight on service recommendations for Auburn Transit and Placer County Transit, but we are in planning these recommendations, we are considering the work that's being done by Roseville Transit, because the outcome of this COA service planning effort, both on our end as well as on Roseville Transit's end, is to really create a more integrated and coordinated transit service network for the entire southwestern portion of Placer County, which includes everything, I would say, west of Alta down to Roseville and the borderline with Sac County, and even beyond in some cases with our commuter services that provide connections to Sacramento. So think of it almost as a one service network provided by three transit operators is our ultimate goal with this planning effort that we're doing. And a lot of our recommendations that are being brought forward to you today are generated from a lot of different input that we received from various different stakeholders and various different phases of public outreach that we did. And then moving forward, once we bring kind of a conclusion to these COA service planning efforts, we will be then looking at implementing the service plan itself alongside with Roseville's service plan that comes out of their planning efforts into a short-range transit plan that will implement these services over the next 5+ years in our region. So that's kind of where we're going once we finish up this COA service planning effort. Next slide, please. What have we done to date? I alluded to this previously, that we had multiple rounds of public outreach. We had outreach in the fall of last year, as well as some outreach in the spring of this year. In our fall outreach, we really focused our outreach effort on getting a broad sense of where are the transit needs and what are people wanting to see in transit services on a kind of a broad high level. And then in the spring, we weighed in with the public on and stakeholders on where do they see trade-offs between different types of service needs. For instance, an example of a trade-off would be, do you want more frequent transit services, or do you want more coverage of your transit services? Those are two different trade-offs that we asked the public to weigh in on, among others. And the reason why we did that was because we have only a finite amount of funding for our service plan. And so we have to think about, where do we want to propose our investments that would get the best, I would call it, bang for your buck, right? Where are we going to most effectively and efficiently use our dollars to coordinate and improve and enhance our services? So that's something that, we looked at. And then the other thing that I'd like to mention is that we did form a technical advisory committee, or a TAC, for this project, that consists not just of our transit operators, but it consists of a representative from all of our member agencies. So that includes all the cities in Placer County, including the town of Loomis and the county itself, as well as other stakeholders that represented different types of constituents. So we had some transit riders, we had some people that represented disabilities, and we had some different people from different community-based organizations and nonprofit entities that provide services to people here in Placer County, that, again, all weighed in on some of the service recommendations and assumptions that led to this plan. I mentioned, again, we coordinated heavily with our local jurisdictions and had, in some cases, one-on-one meetings with our local jurisdictional staff, because our local jurisdictions actually have direct agreements with our transit providers in some cases to provide a certain level of service. So we had to understand what those agreements meant, and maybe in some cases what our local jurisdictions could or would pay for in types of service changes. And then we also looked at, demand. Where is the need for public transit the greatest? And is that demand based on certain trip generators, such as the Roseville Galleria or the hospitals in our region? Or is that demand based on other things? And then how do we also link our demand for service to the actual performance of our potential service changes? And so we worked with our TAC and stakeholder group to develop some foundational assumptions on how we would not just evaluate our existing services and the demand for new services, but then how would our new services that we're proposing live up to their own performance, and would they actually make sense from an operational standpoint for effectiveness and efficiency to promote in this service plan? So all of that is the work that we've done to date to get to where we are. Next slide, please. What have we learned in kind of some of the things that we've heard from our public outreach and our stakeholder TAC? Is one of the key findings is many people want more frequent services. They want the bus to run more in their respective communities. They also want our bus routes, our specific fixed route services, to extend to serve greater areas. So when we are looking at our service plan proposal, you'll see some of that in some of our recommendations. A big thing that we heard, which should be no surprise to all of you, is that there's a lot of inner city travel in the South Placer region, including travel to Sacramento County and beyond, that we've heard there's a need to connect our transit services better to allow for that travel to happen between, our cities of Lincoln, Rockland, Roseville, but then all the way into Sacramento County as well. And then the last thing that we kind of heard is the need for what, is on this slide, is said app-based on-demand service. Well, what that is, there's another term called microtransit for that. And that's basically origin to destination service that you can access on your phone, like an Uber and Lyft type service that connects to our existing on-demand service areas, like our Lincoln Dial-A-Ride and our Rockland Dial-A-Ride. So we heard the need to kind of expand some of those services or provide more opportunities for the public to access those services. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through all of these, but kind of some of the key things that we heard very specific to existing services and improvements that could be made is we recognize that some of our routes, like our Route 10 and our Route 20, are very high performing relative to the current network. And so those routes could have some room for improvement, and different types of enhancements because they are higher performing that can allow for them to better serve new residents or existing residents. But we also know that there's certain routes that maybe are more underperforming comparative to the other routes in our system. And some examples of those are ridership on our routes 50 and 60. So they could potentially use some scale back that would allow us to use resources from those services if we cut some of them back to increase some of the services in our other more productive routes. And the last thing I'd like to point out too is specific to the Auburn region. We heard that their existing type of on-demand service, which is provided through a mobile phone app through Transload, that's very effective for them. It's very successful as well, especially in the post-pandemic reality of travel patterns. And so that's one thing that we want to recognize, that it's been more effective and efficient than their prior fixed route service that they provided called the Auburn Loop. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to transition the PowerPoint over to Eric, who's going to walk through some of our proposed service recommendations.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Hi, everyone again. My name is Eric Bird. I'm a transportation planner with WSP, assisting PCTPA with the development of the COA, and I'm here to talk about the draft service plan that the project team has developed. So as Mike mentioned, we conducted a thorough analysis of the current network and heard from you all at various engagement events to determine the necessary changes to make to the network to make it more useful for everyone. I'm going to go into the individual route changes in the next set of slides, but first wanted to provide an overview of the intent of the recommended service changes that we've developed. So during the outreach portion of the project, we heard that as Mike mentioned, the number one change that the public would like to see is more frequent service. And that's something that we prioritize with our recommended changes, as you'll see. We also wanted to expand where fixed routes and on-demand services currently operate to make the system more accessible for a larger number of residents. The outreach process also told us that many users of the transit network in PCTPA's planning area transfer between multiple services. So we wanted to make that process ultimately more convenient, easier to do, and faster if possible. As Mike mentioned, on-demand service is an important component of the existing network, and we developed strategies to make these services more useful for residents where possible. And lastly, we've redistributed resources from lower performing routes, fixed routes, or on-demand services to other services that are more heavily used to ensure that they're performing as well as possible for the amount of folks that are using them. So now I'll start presenting the recommended service changes by area of the county, and we're going to start with the Auburn-Colfax area, and that includes changes to the Auburn Highway 49 dial-a-ride and Auburn on-demand services, as well as Route 30 and Route 40. So the Auburn Highway 49 dial-a-ride and Auburn on-demand service provide on-demand services within the Auburn area, as you can see with the map on the right. The Auburn on-demand service is particularly popular and effective. However, there is some confusion for residents when using the apps for each service. That can be a little confusing figuring out where each service is operating. So the first recommendation is basically coordinating those apps as much as possible to make sure that for the resident, they're just seeing where they're coming and where they're coming from and going to, and don't really have to deal with specific apps in terms of figuring out which service area you're in. And we want to make sure that that's as seamless as possible for users of the service. We also recommend expanding the service area to cover the Bowman area. That's something that we heard during the outreach process as well. And we're also recommending reducing the span slightly for the Auburn on-demand service to operate from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday to Friday and 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. And that'll help better match ridership demand a little bit, where it's a little bit lower outside of those hours that we are planning to discontinue for the service. Route 30 provides fixed route service in the Auburn area, and to help increase ridership on the route, we recommend extending the route from its southern terminal, as you can see the map on the right, at Auburn Station across I-80 to downtown Auburn. That will provide residents with access to more commercial areas, schools, and other trip generators that, again, will hopefully boost ridership for the route. Route 40 provides service between Auburn Station and Alta along I-80. And to make the service a bit more useful for residents, we recommend adding a round trip in the afternoon. That will hopefully provide shorter wait times for riders from Auburn making their return trip to Alta. So next, we'll go over changes for routes that operate along primarily the I-80 corridor. So this will include Route 10, Route 50, and Route 60. So Route 10 is currently the heaviest used route in the network and provides service between Auburn Station and the Watt I-80 light rail station in Sacramento. And to help grow ridership even more on the route, we recommend increasing frequencies from 9 a.m. to noon from 60 minutes to 30 minutes. And the reason why we chose that time frame is we analyzed the ridership by hour for the route, and that's actually when it's highest, is between that 9 a.m. to noon time frame. So we want to increase frequencies along that time to, again, generate even more ridership for the route. We also recommend realigning the route in the westbound direction and adding stops in both directions to serve the Taylor Road Park and Ride lot, as you can see with the star right here in the map on the right. That will provide connections to existing Roseville transit services in that area. Route 50 currently is one of the more underperforming services in the network and provides service between Auburn Station and Sierra College. And due to the underperforming nature of the route, we do recommend converting the fixed route to a permanent dial-a-ride service. We also recommend reducing early morning and evening service, as well as discontinuing Saturday service. And again, we're proposing that due to particularly low ridership for those two timeframes. This also provides the opportunity to redistribute those resources to other services with higher ridership in the current network. Route 60 is the longest route in the network, as you can see the map on the right. Currently provides service between Colfax and downtown Sacramento. Since this is a primarily commuter route, the pandemic has greatly affected ridership due to the increase in work from home rates and the corresponding decrease in downtown office occupancy. And sort of responding to that ridership change, we recommend discontinuing the first AM trip to Sacramento and the second PM trip to Colfax, both of which have particularly low ridership, as well as discontinuing the route between Auburn and Colfax, again, due to its low ridership. The last area I'm going to cover is the State Route 65 corridor, which will address changes to Route 20, Route 70, and we've listed Route 82, but we're not currently proposing any changes to that route. So Route 20 is the second heaviest used route in the network and provides service between Lincoln and Sierra College. And while the route currently experiences high ridership, the constrained run times and congestion along the route impacts on-time performance and can result in buses showing up late to their stops. So to help solve this, we actually propose splitting the route into two. And I'm going to try and walk you all through the changes here that we're showing on the map here. The dashed lines are showing the proposed routes, and then the solid line shows the existing Route 20. So the new kind of eastern route that we're proposing will operate between the Roseville Galleria and Sierra College. And we're proposing sort of a bi-directional loop for this route. So in the eastbound direction, the route will So coming from the Sierra College, it'll be operating along the existing alignment running from the college to Springview Drive, as you can see here. And then for the westbound routing, it'll continue along Sunset Boulevard to Park Drive, extending down to Roseville Parkway, and then terminating at the Galleria. And then the opposite direction, it'll run from the Galleria up to Springview Drive, follow the loop around here, and then extend along Sunset Boulevard, and then continue the existing alignment up to the college here. So again, it'll create that kind of bi-directional loop for that route, which will allow ultimately for 30-minute service for that portion of the route, which will be an improvement over the existing 60-minute service that currently operates. For the western portion, as you can see here in the blue dash line, that will provide service between the Galleria and the existing park and ride lot along Industrial Avenue in Lincoln. And that will provide connections up here at the park and ride lot to the proposed rapid link service and also the realigned Route 70 that I'm going to go over in the next slide. This routing, as you can see, it'll cover new areas of Rockland, particularly providing access to key trip generators such as Rockland High School, as well as providing service to new areas of the city for more residents. And we are proposing 30-minute service for that western route as well. So this will be an increase in service for these residents. Again, we're seeing really high ridership on this route, so we want to make sure that we are building that as possible. I know that's a lot to kind of go over in this slide right here. And everything is covered on PCTPA's website. So that's where you can see a description of the changes as well as a larger version of this map that you see here. Route 70 provides fixed route service within the city of Lincoln, and to improve connections to other routes and parts of the city, we're recommending extending the route along 1st and 3rd Street between R Street and Joyner Parkway, as you can see right here where my cursor is. And we're also proposing to end the route at the park and ride lot along Industrial Avenue, again, to provide connections to the proposed Rapid Link service and the realigned Route 20 that I just went over in the previous slide. So that wraps up our proposed changes for the fixed routes within the network. And lastly, I'm going to go over recommended changes to a few of Placer County Transit's dial-a-ride services. So the Lincoln dial-a-ride service currently experiences heavy demand, particularly during school hours. And to accommodate this, we are recommending adding some more weekday service during those times of heaviest ridership. So we'll be looking at when those times are and adjusting service as necessary to make sure that we're accommodating that ridership demand. The Granite Bay dial-a-ride service, as you can see here in this first bullet point, there's a 3-hour gap in the service window, and that makes it particularly difficult for residents to use this type of service for their daily trips. And to help solve that, we recommend providing a continuous 4-hour weekday midday service window, and also to look into an agreement with Roseville Transit for their Arrow on-demand service to potentially provide service to this area. So that wraps up all the recommended changes for the network, and I thank you all for your time, and I'll pass it back to Mike to go over next steps for the project.
Thank you so much, Eric. And Gabby, if you could please transition to the next slide. We heard about, of course, all of the proposed service recommendations. And keep in mind, this is our draft proposal. We definitely want to hear from the public and all of our stakeholders regarding this draft proposal. And we do have a public comment period available for this plan, this draft plan, available through August 16th. So it was released last week, and we have that availability through August 16th. Moving forward, what happens after the service planning effort is that we do anticipate bringing the final service plan proposal to the PCTPA board in September at their board meeting, which typically meets in the last Wednesday of September, and that would be in this case the 25th. For their acceptance essentially of this proposal. And then following that acceptance by the PCTPA board, our respective transit providers, in this case, Auburn Transit and Placer County Transit, would bring this proposal to their respective governing authorities in October for formal adoption of the service plan. It's important to note that, we have a slew of recommendations in this service plan. And while we are recommending these service changes, it will be ultimately up to our member jurisdictions, in particular, those that partner with like Placer County Transit to provide services, to ultimately accept and adopt what elements of the service plan they're able to implement, given fiscal constraint and that sort of thing. So there will be some time after these agencies adopt the service plans before you even see actual services going into effect. The other thing to note is that following October is when we would anticipate taking our COA service plan and combining it with the service plan that outcome from Roseville Transit that's currently working on theirs with a similar schedule. And then putting that into a short range transit plan that we would then implement moving forward over the next 5+ years. So that short range transit plan is going to look at different elements of service implementation. So not necessarily the route configurations, but more the operational elements, as well as some of the customer facing elements, like maybe, for example, fare integration. How can we better coordinate some fare structures and that sort of thing, maybe even marketing to, again, increase demand for our public transit services. Another effort that we're even looking at post short range transit plan, or maybe even done at the tail end of our short range transit plan, is assessing our bus stops and the conditions of our bus stops, and what types of accessibility do we currently have, and what types of passenger amenities do we have that maybe could be enhanced to further increase demand for public transit. So those are all things that we'll be working on in the year following our COA service plan adoption. But again, we do want to hear from all of you tonight, which is why we are here today. And I will say, transition to the next slide, please, Gabby. Thank you. All of these materials that we talked about, including technical documents that we prepared, analyzing existing condition of our current services, analyzing our ridership demand, as well as all those trip generators I told you about, as well as even our assumptions that set the foundation for our service plan changes. All of that is available on our website, pctpa.net/COA-SRTP. So you can go there, you can kind of find all the processes and the steps by which we analyzed this project, and then, of course, made the recommendations that we are today.